All right, and welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Podcast. My name is Dr. Nick Curtis here, running the show at the Integrated Rehab and Performance Center. So today is our first non-golf podcast, and we are diving into some nutrition and functional medicine. But to start, we're really going to focus on the core and the basics, which is nutrition. For this first episode, we are going to talk about energy availability and calculating total energy expenditure. This is a crucial, very important first step before we dive into macros or micronutrients or anything like that. And definitely before we talk about supplementing or anything of that nature, we need to understand how many calories are we burning from activity, from our resting metabolic rate, and then from the thermal effect of food. And then for our very serious athletes, we want to calculate our energy availability to make sure we are maximizing our performance on the field or the ice or in the weight room. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Stay tuned. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is calculate our total energy expenditure. What that is this takes into account pretty much everything throughout the day that is costing our body energy, right, in the form of calories, right? So the first thing that we look at is resting, or actually it's basal metabolic rate. And what that is if you just lay in a dark room all day long and don't move an inch, our body is going to use energy to maintain vital function, vital organ function, and vital systems in the body, right? And there's actually quite a bit of calories that come just from these functions that we use. So we certainly need to make sure that we are taking in enough calories in any given day to maintain our basal metabolic rate. Now, a similar concept is the resting metabolic rate, which is, it's not so strictly measured, right? So basal metabolic rate, that'll be measured, if they actually are to measure it, in a dark room in a reclined position throughout the course of a day. And they'll kind of measure the oxygen content of that room, right? Just to tell how much energy is being burned and then how much carbon dioxide and stuff like that is being released. So very, the constraints there are very specific, right? But when it comes to resting metabolic rate, it's more of an estimate, and we just use some body measures for that to determine that. And again, what we do after we get our basal metabolic rate, and there's a few different equations that we can use for that. Things like the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, which is typical for resting metabolic rate, takes into things like age, your sex, height, weight in kilograms, height is in centimeters, and then using that in the formula. And there's a different formula between males and females. So what we can do is kind of get our resting metabolic rate for us, right? And what we do after that is we take that and we calculate in our physical activity level, and that becomes a multiplier to the to what we have gotten from the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, right? So after we calculate our resting metabolic rate, that's the number we'll use. We don't typically use the basal metabolic rate, but we use the RMR. Once we find that number, we can multiply that by our physical activity level. And again, not an exact science here. All this has to be done in estimates. But there's different tables that we can use to help determine what the multiplier will be. So the table might look like this, where we have sedentary to light activity. That includes things like walking or yoga, right? The PAL factor will start at 1.4, and then for that light to sedentary activity, it can go from 1.4 to 1.69. When we talk more moderate activity, this is things like fitness classes, weightlifting, running, or cycling, right? But not endurance running or cycling. This is where we get to a PAL factor of about 1.7 to 1.99, okay? So, for instance, a CrossFit class where maybe you're just training within 1 hour class, we might consider like a 1.75 PAL. Now, when it comes to more vigorous activity, so endurance athletes, long distance, and elite athletes, so maybe very elite CrossFitters that are training multiple times a day, then we can get into that 2.0 to 2.4 PAL factor. Okay, where we are multiplying our RMR by, let's say, 1.75, and that is giving us our total calories from our resting metabolic rate and our physical activity to get us a number of calories. But there's one more thing that we might want to consider, and that is the thermal effect from food. So when we eat food, we get energy from it, but we also use energy to digest this food. So what we might consider there is just taking that last number we had, the RMR plus the PAL factored in. Just that number there is we multiply that by 0.1, right? So 10%, and then we add that on to the top, and that will be our total energy expenditure for any given day, right? So this is a very important number to get to before we start considering how many calories we are getting in our diet and the distribution of those calories between fats, carbs, and protein. Okay, so a quick summary there of what we just talked about. The RMR, resting metabolic rate, we're going to calculate that using that big long equation. After that, we take that number, we multiply it by our PAL, and we can go online and just find a few different tables that will tell us about where we should be multiplying, where our activity level is, right? And that's for any given day. So if you're training 5 days a week, you might have a training day calorie goal, which is accounting for all the calories that you're burning from that activity, all the vital organ function activity, and then the thermal effect from food. So we take that RMR, multiply it by the PAL, and then we add on the additional thermal effect from food, which was 10% of that previous number, and that is our total energy expenditure. Now, on days that we're not training, our PAL might go down, right, where we're just kind of walking around. So we'll multiply it by 1.4 will be our PAL that we multiply our RMR from, and then we multiply that by 0.1, and we add that to the top, and that is our kind of rest day total energy expenditure. Now from here, we can start creating goals depending on, we should start creating calorie intake goals and macronutrient goals depending on what our fitness goals are and our competitive goals are, right? So if we're trying to lose weight, we're trying to put on weight, we're trying to maintain muscle mass while getting stronger, we're trying to break our Fran time in a CrossFit workout, or we have Murph coming up, right? And we want to be very, very competitive in it, right? And take it very seriously. Then we have the information where we can start manipulating it in different ways. Okay, and then the last thing, and again, this is mostly for very serious athletes or youth athletes, especially, where we want to make sure that our energy availability is right where we need it to be, okay? So what is energy availability? This is kind of just exactly what it sounds like. We use calories throughout the day, and we take in calories throughout the day. And we want to make sure that we take in more calories than we are using, right, if we're going to make some sort of improvement, right, build muscle, improve endurance, create new mitochondria in the muscles, things like that. But we have to make sure that's in check, obviously not to gain too much weight, especially for, say, a wrestler where weight is important. Well, now it's tough to be able to play that game where we're getting enough nutrients in and calories in as we use them, but we want to make sure that we're not overdoing it, right? So we have to look at a couple things to make sure that's happening. And again, having those numbers that we talked about earlier is really important. But when it comes to energy expenditure, the research is showing that having 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, I'll explain that in a little bit, is the ideal number for performance. So having enough energy to be at your top peak performance on any given day, right? Where you're feeling the best, you feel the strongest, you feel the most powerful, things like that, right? So say in sports where weight isn't necessarily vital, right? Like something like wrestling. Say if you're a hockey player where your weight doesn't have to be necessarily directly on point. This is something where if you want to be the best hockey player we can be, we can do all the training that you want and all that and have the best skills coach and things like that. But in terms of nutrition, to maximize all those other things, plus your ability to just produce energy and force, we want to make sure that our energy availability is at around that 45 kilocalorie per kilogram of fat-free mass. Now, if we're not looking to optimize our performance, we might not need to be at that 45, but we most definitely need to be above 30, okay? After or under 30 is where there have been found associated impairments in a variety of bodily functions. Remember, we're talking vital bodily functions here, like hormone creation, mood, energy, overtraining effects. There's lots of different things, right? These are very important vital functions of the body. If we're under 30 for that energy availability number, we're seeing some serious effects, right? Especially if we're there chronically, right? It takes some time. But if we're there for a long time, say over the course of a season, we definitely will not be performing at our best. But if we're not an athlete, say we're just a fitness enthusiast or an exerciser who likes to make improvements, right? Likes to get better, more fit, but also isn't necessarily looking to be at their peak performance, right? They might maybe want to be losing a little bit of fat and working on their body composition slowly over time. Maybe we don't have to maximize that 45, but we still definitely don't want to be under 30 because, again, hormone function, hormone creation, all sorts of things like that will be influenced by this, right? So definitely staying above that 30 and maybe up closer towards that 45, but we don't have to necessarily be approaching that 45 mark if we're not looking just to be the best performer on the field at any given time. Okay? And so calculating this energy availability, what that is your total calorie intake for the day minus your physical activity calories spent, right? And so we can use some charts and the more closely you monitor things, maybe like weight before and after exercise or METs, right? So if you're checking heart rate and things like that, you'll get a better sense of how many calories you're burning. But here we're looking specifically at how many calories you're burning, not from your resting metabolic rate, not from the thermal effect of food, but from activity levels, right? So practice or a weight session, things like that. We subtract that from our total calorie intake to get a number. We divide that number by fat-free mass in kilograms. So what fat-free mass is, say we're in pounds, you take your weight in pounds, you multiply it by your percent body fat. So say if you're 10% body fat, you take your weight in pounds, you multiply it by 0.10. Whatever that number is, you subtract that from your weight in body, your body weight in pounds. And then from there, you divide by 2.2 to get that in kilograms. Sounds like a lot. What that is just your fat-free mass in kilograms. You divide that previous equation by that number, you have your energy availability. We want that number to be at about 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass. Okay? And what that does, that means that there's enough energy left over after activity, sufficient energy left over to have your organ function and body systems performing at an optimal level, right? They are not wanting for energy, and they're able to take the stimulus that you're giving it and create positive effects with it, as well as just the normal bodily vital functions. Okay? So, again, a quick summary of what we talked about here today. Step 1, calculating your total energy expenditure. Resting metabolic rate times your physical activity level, right? The factor that comes from there. And then you want to add in your thermal effect of food, and that is your total energy expenditure for the day. And then we can look at some goals going forward from there. But once we have that number, we are good. If we're a serious athlete, or maybe we've been experiencing some issues for the past couple of years or a couple of months, and we're not necessarily looking to be the best athlete out on a field. Maybe we just like to hike, or we like to do CrossFits 4 or 5 days a week, right? And we just want to be making improvements there, but we're not expecting to win the Open or anything like that. Well, then we don't necessarily have to look at energy availability, but if you've been feeling like you haven't been recovering very well for the last couple months, things like that, maybe this is something we do look at to see that make sure you're not close to that 30 mark, or definitely not below it, right? Because in that case, we just found something very important, and we definitely need to start addressing your overall calorie intake, right? So you can see how getting these numbers to start are very important. A lot of it comes with estimations, though. So nothing here is perfect, and things need to be kind of modified as we go along until we find that perfect, this calorie goal for you on any given day is definitely good for you. Or, we're still putting on a little bit of weight, let's lower that down a little bit. Or we're losing weight too fast, things like that, whatever it might be. My training session the other day, this last week, has been very tough for me, right? I feel like I'm not recovering, I'm not performing well. Okay, let's increase that calorie just a little bit here, and I think that'll be a good spot for you. Things like that. So just making adjustments as we go along, and then we can make adjustments to those macronutrients as well, which we will talk about here soon. All right, so thanks for tuning in today. We have our big important numbers, total energy expenditure, and then for some people where we might want to look at energy availability as well. That's the topic for today. Thanks for listening. There's a blog article out where we can see some of those equations actually written down for you, summarized a little bit. If that is helpful, that'll be coming out, let's see, next Monday, I think March 11th. So check out the website around then, and you'll see something similar here, but in writing, and you can go back and read and take a look at those equations as well. Again, reach out to me if you need anything or want to go over some of these things personally. I'd love to help out. Thanks. Bye.